Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to Cube Reviews, episode 29. This is your host, Ian Braverman. Today I'm joined by a very exciting guest, Usman Jamil. How are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Just got back from Boston Cube Party over the weekend. It was a fantastic time. I actually got top eight, so I'm very
Oh,
proud of myself. It was a really fun event,
nice.
and I always love these Cube events. Are you a fan of Cube events? Have you been to any?
I went to KubeCon. I did a panel about designing a cube. That was the first one I'd gone to, and it was nice.
Are you going to go again?
Yeah, probably.
Oh yeah, last year I couldn't make it. I definitely plan on going again this year. I've gone for 2 years now. It's such a fun event. I've gone to a bunch of Cube events this year. Plan to go to more.
Nice.
Yeah, for people who may not know you, if you're involved in the cube space online, I'm sure people have heard of you, but you're a very prolific cube designer, content writer, creator for years. Like you wrote for the Star City Games for many years, Hipsters of the Coast, Quiet Speculation, Lucky Paper Radio, your own Substack. The list goes on.
Yeah.
And you're also one of the developers on the committee for the MTGO Vintage Cube, Popper Cube, written many articles all the way back to New Phyrexia. And
Yeah.
also, you created the first Cube podcast, The Third Power, in 2010.
hmm
And you're currently the host of Pack One Slick Ones with Trainmaster GT.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, I started writing around 2010. I'm trying to think of time-wise. I think it may have been around Scars and Mirrodin, but I did my first review about New Phyrexia. It was my first cube review. It's relevant to this topic that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and tell us about your overall history with Magic. When did you get started? When did Cube really start to interest you? What about Cube drew you in?
Yeah, so I started playing Magic around revised Fallen Empires around 1995. My brother taught me how to play Magic, and we kind of just got into it, and then he kind of fell off it, and then kept playing with my group of friends until about 1999. And it was kind of like a confluence of things where I was just mainly just a casual, just kind of playing it as a young person, just playing whatever decks I had. But I kept up with a lot of the Type 2 or standard stuff back in the day. And when I did that, I was kind of following what was going on. And then there was a lot of confluence of stuff going on in late 1999. It was around the time of Tolarian Academy. A lot of my friends were moving away. It did most of the damage for me. And then Mercadian Masks came out and didn't really do much to reel me back in. And I was just I guess I'm just done. I guess I'm just done with Magic. I think I sold a good amount of my stuff, but I didn't have anything worthwhile really. You hear the stories about people who have duels and lotuses and whatever, and then they sell them, and then they're just kicking themselves. I didn't have any horror stories like that. I had some LEDs that were bulk, and then sold them years later when not when they started being worth something. But I was lurking the WotC site, every once in a while just for giggles. I think I remember when WotC used to have a thing where essentially they would put a polls to the audience, people visiting the site for ways to design the cards. Like Crucible Worlds was designed that way. Forgotten Ancient was another one. At the time when I was going to the site, it was Spirit Monger. And I think it was right at the end of that. And I was just seeing a 5 mana 6/6 with regeneration. I was just this is just so absurd. And then still just visiting every once in a while. I saw the Betrayers pre-release, and then I was just okay, I guess I'll go. I haven't done one of these in years, and this might be fun. And had a pretty good time. I gave the cards away that I had because I had no intention. I just figured it was a one and done kind of thing. And then somebody who I'd been hanging out with at the draft was talking about F&M. And at the time, standard was just atrocious. It was just a two deck format with Ravager Affinity and Tooth and Nail. I was I guess I'm just drafting or, just doing limited. And, it kind of cut my teeth doing that. And it was kind of just interesting how my arc started just playing constructed for the most part and then became mostly limited. What got me into Cube was there was a content producer named Evan Irwin who was doing a lot of Magic content. He had a show called The Magic Show, which is kind of like what the Professor or, just Pleasant Kenobi, those kind of people, those kind of shows which show what's going on in Magic. And he was talking about Cube, which was this popular thing that seemed interesting. I thought it was really cool. It was really interesting, just being something you could kind of control because I've, been drafting formats that seemed interesting and some that were bad and being able to essentially create a format. And it just seemed really cool. A lot of old cards that I was unfamiliar with from the time of like masks to Kamigawa that I was unfamiliar with. Fetch lands were, some of those cards that were just like unknown to me. So it was really interesting revisiting that time for me and then using that to start to be involved in Cube. Because like locally there was some cubes in the area around that time. It was starting to get more popular. There were some locally, but I wasn't part of like the cool kids who had them. It was just very clicky here, and it's just like, I didn't know those people. I think I drafted one locally who wasn't really part of the clicky crowd. I drafted it once. It was interesting because the things that I saw that went wrong drove a lot of my design choices in terms of what I was doing. It was interesting because I feel like if I was able to cube regularly with a group that wasn't, I would probably just be like a cube drafter and not like I never would have made my own cube and never went and got to design, never would have made content, stuff like that. So it's interesting how all that kind of came together in a good way.
That's interesting that your inability to cube as often as you would want drove you to do content just so you could be involved in cube.
Yeah, honestly, like a lot of it's kind of just like that DIY myth ethos of just like, I can't do this, so I have to do this myself. There really wasn't a lot of content about like how to design a cube. You kind of had to reverse engineer it from looking at cube lists and being like, all right, this looks good, but you had no experience with them, so you were just kind of guessing, right? Like you're just looking at lists like, all right, here's like 5 lists that are online. Reverse engineering like what cards are popular in them and like what do you think could work? It was really weird. And it was just kind of a lot of guesswork. And like a lot of people's cubes, their first draft was kind of rough, but just refining it over time. And it's just kind of been like a work in progress kind of since then.
Yeah, you had to pioneer what cube would become later on. If nobody knew how to build a cube back then and your only resource was limited, and I will say, I think that limited formats have gotten a lot better over time. I think that WotC has also learned how to design better limited formats as time has gone on.
Hmm.
So learning the lessons from limited drafting, but also just cube mentality and thought improving over time.
Yeah, I guess I should also mention like when I got back to the game, I always followed constructed. Like even though 2005's standard format was terrible, it was something I always followed. I didn't really get into playing constructed again until like 2019. I always intended to get Arena, but never did because I didn't think my computer was good enough because it wasn't on mobile at the time. So I was like, I'll try it. I'll join the beta and maybe it'll work. I was kind of late to the beta, maybe. There were certain codes you could do to get like these skins of 3 popular planeswalkers, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, the 4 mana Vraska, and the 4 mana Ral Zarek.
I remember those.
Yeah, and I
I
was just
think I got the Teferi one.
I think I got that one, but I gave it to a friend. I was just like, I don't think I'm gonna play Arena that much. Like, I don't know if I'm going to. And then like I slowly got into it. I was just grinding mono red as a free to player because I was just like, I don't want to spend money and just kind of slowly started grinding and then like had a few years when I was just, very much of a grinder on Arena. Like I was probably of all things alchemy, I was probably like one of the like top people playing alchemy of all things, like go
Interesting.
figure. Yeah, it was weird. Like, and I thought about it, like, why alchemy of all things? It's a format that, in theory, it's fast flowing, even though it isn't. They say because they can edit cards on the fly, they can decide like this card costs like 1 mana more or 1 mana less. It can be better. But a lot of the cards, because of certain mechanics, reward on the fly thinking. And that was one of the strengths I think I had as a player, is just being able to adapt quickly, play off the wall stuff, which people weren't prepared for. I think that really helped.
I
But
had a
yeah,
lot
that's
of fun with Arena before. I haven't touched it too much in the last couple of years.
yeah. When I was like really tryharding, it really wasn't like fun for me at the end. So now I just kind of clock in and do my 4 dailies, and I'm just like, all right, play some alchemy, play some otters, get my 4 wins, clock out, which makes
Yup.
it sound like a job.
Got to get your 4 hours a week.
Yeah, exactly. Get my 4 wins and then clock out and call it a day. A lot of early cube articles didn't really talk much about how to design a cube. Like a lot of it was just like, this is what's cool about a cube. Like, wow, this is really interesting. They had to sell people on it because there was no cube on Magic Online. YouTube was still in its infancy. It wasn't popular enough to have videos at the time. So a lot of people still had no idea what cube was about. You had to sell somebody like, wow, cube is really cool. At the very end, here's my cube list. And it's like, that didn't really help. I don't know how to make a cube. Thanks, but
When I had my peasant cube in like 2016 when I was in college, I would go up to everyone like every day at the Magic Club and say, "Hey, cube is great. Do my
hmm
cube. Come on." And eventually I forced enough people to get like six people in pods.
Yeah, it was rough for me in the beginning. Like I had to, oh, man, it was like when I was starting because again, people didn't know what cube was. Like it was like pulling teeth. Like I remember having to go to like Star City events and GPs just to get cube drafts in. It sucked. That's what I had to do in those early years.
And now we live in the world that everyone cubes. Well,
Yeah,
enough to be able to do a convention.
I would say so. Yeah, it's definitely a lot more mainstream now. Like if you say talk about Cube to a good amount of Magic people, I think most people would know. In 2009, like no, not at all.
Yes. Before we jump into the main topic, what are some of your other hobbies outside of Magic?
So hobbies, I would say I was really into video games. I was really into like NES, Nintendo stuff when I was younger. And for the most part, like I still game somewhat, but a lot of it's kind of in that space because I'm too cheap to like buy anything new. Like we have a Switch. That's probably the newest console we have. Like I have an NES, SNES, Dreamcast, N64, PS1, PS2. And I think that's all the stuff we have hooked up right now. And then the Switch. So it's just like this gap of like from that long. But like a lot of it was just, yeah, like, always big into video games as a kid and then kind of stayed with it when I got older and still would consider myself, even though I don't obviously game as much as I used to, but that's something I really still enjoy. Another hobby is like metal music. I got into alt rock during the 90s, like most kids growing up, and then it kind of dovetailed from like that to like Metallica and then later on like discovering metal and like all the subgenres of it. And it was a very strange time, I would say, like in the early 2000s because I was into like video games and metal, which were like not necessarily the coolest things to be into at the time. And it was kind of interesting how they became like more, I don't want to say accepted probably isn't the right word, but just became, I guess accepted probably is the right word actually. Getting more into that kind of stuff, still being into it when I was younger and still kind of being into it. I still definitely listen to a lot of metal now. I enjoy cooking, like I guess most South Asian people are. Although I didn't as a kid, I kind of, just rebelled against it. And then now I'm just like, I'm gonna go make some chicken adobo. Go to the grocery store like 5 minutes before they close to get garlic or something. Which actually happened a couple days ago.
It sounds like you were just ahead of your time playing Magic video games and listening to metal.
Yeah, honestly, like it does kind of feel like I was kind of ahead of my time or was just born too early. Like if I was in college and when there was like e-gaming, I feel like I probably would have gotten a full ride or something. But it was just like it kind of felt like that with Cube too. Seeing the early stuff and seeing how things are now is definitely like I'm happy with how things are in terms of the development of the genre. I think it's really cool.
Definitely. And I'm really excited to dive into today's topic, which is a unique topic that I thought, oh, I want to talk to you about. You're the right person to speak to. Today, we're talking about a very common aspect of cube creation, content creation, also just general magic content creation, which is evaluating spoiler cards,
Yeah.
specifically for cube, but for many different formats.
I've been doing a lot of Cube articles and like reviews. A lot of the content I've done has kind of just gone into either like theory-based stuff or set reviews. A lot of the times when a set comes out, people are asking like, what do I want to consider for a cube? Or, what's good enough for the cube in giant air quotes. And essentially a lot of content tends to go in those two kind of columns. For the most part, like I said, I did them since New Phyrexia, but there was a time mainly during COVID, we stopped weekly cubing. Like eventually, despite my early struggles, I was able to get a cube group going, and then we were able to get weekly cube going at like a store. It was on like early 2020, right when COVID was starting to ramp up, that we were just like, let's put this on the back burner for a while. I think in theory we were planning on like doing them online, but we just never got around to it. But like during that time, I'd probably say from like 2020 to like 2022, I just didn't do cube content much because I was just like, I wasn't really cubing much at the time, so I wasn't doing set reviews at the time either. But I think for the most part, it's been kind of like with my Magic playing arc. I was playing from 1995 to 1999, quit for 5 years, and then played afterwards. So it's like this break. One of the things I'd been thinking about in terms of ever since kind of getting back into it, because I've kind of gotten more after CubeCon. been kind of getting more on making content again. I'd like create a Substack where I'd been putting a lot of my mental calories towards that. And in part of that, I've been thinking about what kind of purpose Cube content has in the review space. So this guy, Jake Brown, he used to write for Star City Games. He has a Substack, which I think is very good on Substack. And he had talked about, when he talked about Ether Drift, was talking about like the purpose of set reviews for limited retail sets and kind of how limited resources kind of set the standard in terms of what you should do. Essentially, just to read the cards out loud and just be like, okay, I think this is that, what you could do this. Here's what we should rate it, et cetera, et cetera. Just go down the line. And a lot of it has just kind of been done out of tradition. Like it's 4 to 6 hours. It's a lot of information. Sometimes it doesn't really help a lot of times. And like sometimes a lot of the information is very contextual. So what he talked about was this writer, Malcolm Gladwell, who used to tell the story of somebody named Howard Moskowitz, who worked at Prego, which is like this kind of generic spaghetti sauce. He said every conceivable way you can vary spaghetti sauce. He varied spaghetti sauce. And sure enough, as you sat down and analyzed all this data on spaghetti sauce, you realize that all Americans fall into one of three groups. One who like their spaghetti sauce plain. There's a group that likes it spicy, and then who like it chunky. And of those three facts, the third one was the most significant because in the 80s, if you went to a supermarket, you couldn't find extra chunky. And Prego turned to Howard and said, are you telling me that 1/3 of Americans crave extra chunky spaghetti sauce, and yet no one is servicing their needs? And he said, yes. And then Prego went back and reformulated their spaghetti sauce. And then over the next 10 years, they made 600 million off the line of extra chunky spaghetti sauce. He said, to me, it feels like for 20 years in Magic, we had plain sauce. He also brought up the example of just like when people are surveyed about their coffee preferences, a lot of people will say they like strong black coffee, but in reality, a lot of people just want milky coffee. He said something along the lines of just like, I want a milky weak coffee. Some people want 6 hours of card reviews, and some just want the hits. Some just want to search while they're, on Arena and just like, oh, Control F, find this. And I think the reason I bring this whole thing up, by the way, is a lot of Cube content in terms of reviews, and that's something you brought up in the perspective outline we were talking about. A lot of it kind of went from a very one size fits all method of evaluating things. And that's something like me and Trainmaster GT did our review of Ether Drift. It's something that I'd been wanting to do for a very long time because normally it would just be like a very quantitative scale. How good is this card? Is it powerful or not? Does it make it into the cube? Big air quotes again. And, is it worth your consideration? Oftentimes power isn't the only axis of evaluation for people. A lot of times it's just like other stuff. There's got to be a way to capture this because it's like not everybody cares that much about power. A lot of times it's other stuff that matters to people. Some of the other times it's just like this card's boring or like this art is weird or like I don't like this supplemental stuff. And it's just like I personally don't care, but that's not just me, right? And that's where I kind of got that from. We'll do something called like a power scale for just like people who want the meat and potatoes. Is this good enough for Cube? We started calling it like the fun scale. And then I think I asked on Blue Sky, I'm like, I don't know if this really works. Somebody said vibes. I'm like, yeah, there we go. Let's do vibes. And I think that's just a better fit in terms of that. And I think that's the thing. Like for so long, we've had just no chunky spaghetti sauce in like content. And part of it is because some of it can be quite subjective. Like part of it in terms of evaluation, in terms of just like how historically I've looked at cards for Cube, because part of it's just like basic rate stuff, right? What's the rate on this card? If I look at something like Static Prison, it's like 1 white mana. It works with energy stuff. You can tuck something away for a few turns. And part of it is just kind of that raw, basic rate stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying. For a long time, it felt like Cube content, like you said, was really focused primarily on just what is the power level of this card. Like I was just listening to a limited resources episode on the newest Dragonstorm episode, and it's still very focused on, okay, is this a B tier common or uncommon? What are the stats? How strong is its effect? What is my pack one, pick one ability of this card in terms of the strength compared to the other cards in its limited format? And I think that makes sense when you're looking at a straight up limited set because it's always going to be the same. This Tarkir Dragonstorm set is always going to be the same 300 so whatever cards, and you want to know what to pick to win this draft format. Compared to
Yeah.
Cube, where there are thousands and thousands and thousands of different cards that you can put into it. And often it's not about spiking the draft or trying to make the most optimized deck. It's often about, like you said, vibes. Does this card fit my own personal goals for my cube? Is the art cool? Does it look fun? Does it fit into my archetypes that I'm trying to fit into my cube? There's so many different metrics that I feel like power level, to me, at least as a cube designer of many cubes, it's something that doesn't even matter to me at all. And I think that it's almost similar in many ways to the way that Commander content is created. In Commander, people purposefully build decks for different power levels. You might build a 1 out of 10 on the scale that you're building horse tribal, and it's all just garbage commons and uncommons that look funny and are cool. Every few sets, a new horse card comes out, and you don't care at all how strong it is, as long as it has a cool horse on the art. All the way
Yeah.
up to, oh, this is perfect for my CDH deck, and it's optimal, and it's going to be the best free counter spell. And it's so much more in depth than even that. Compared to power, it's also about aesthetics. It's also about the politics. Will it be fun for my playgroup? And I feel like Cube is similar in that way. Like I have 10 different cubes that all have different cards. Some will be my proliferate cube, and I get really excited about cards that care about counters, or my trinket cube that cares about 0 and 1 mana garbage artifacts that don't really do anything, or my peasant cube that I'm only going to look at the commons and uncommons. So that's something that I've been really wondering about is how do you make content that fits into so many different people's desires for different types of cubes?
Totally. So it's something that when I was thinking about this episode, when you brought that up, the example I thought of was really weird, but I think it fits. Like when I was getting into metal, like in the early 2000s, for those unfamiliar, there's a lot of subgenres of metal. I don't know how many I could count, but a lot. And a lot of it is just figuring out what you like within it. And what helped me discovering the genre was finding reviewers because again, it's very subjective. Like art is subjective for the most part. Like you'll find a lot more people who think like Master of Puppets is like a classic versus just like Bad Album or something. But one of the things that I found personally useful for me was when I was looking through review sites, if it was generally where I agreed with the person in terms of just overall, like, or if I agreed with what they were saying, their methodologies, just like overall if my thoughts kind of vied with theirs, just like generally. And I think that can happen sometimes just like where people can have like strengths and weaknesses in their own evaluations of cards, but also just like even in like music, right? Like if it was somebody who was just like late era Sepultura is bad because it's not the same singer, it's just like I'm not going to say this person's evaluations are bad, but like maybe there's a hole in their evaluation or something. Because even still, you'll hear evaluations of cards, and like sometimes people have their own strengths and weaknesses, and that's something I tried to temper over the years. I think one of the things I realized recently when I was looking at some of the evaluations that I missed in terms of power level was the surveil lands and stock up. I missed the bar pretty hard on those. And the reason why, when I thought about it, is I figured that those were kind of redundant effects that I personally didn't need. I don't need more tap lands, and stock up is just like a big draw effect, and I don't need it. But kind of putting myself out of that because like whenever I, there's a new set, what I'll do is I'll seed whatever cards I want to try out into the draft. Like say there's 20 cards. I'll set aside those 20 cards and put them on the side and say we have four people drafting. Shuffle up the seeds, have me take five, pass the five around, or everybody gets five, I should say, and then just make packs with the rest, and then shuffle those up, and then just do that, and then just get feedback on how they do. A lot of discourse is kind of just like on vintage cubes and stuff like that, like the max power cubes. My cube was powered for many years, and eventually I was just like, I don't enjoy this. I'm going to depower my cube, and then kind of used legacy as kind of a guardrail eventually for like the power level of it. Personally, for me, that's why I wanted to keep my cube at that level to make it more approachable for people. And the reason I bring up the whole reviewer thing is like if somebody wants to read my reviews and they generally, in theory, they should be able to dial into what I'm saying and then season to taste based on that. I think this card is good, but it's, just essentially, A, it's an opinion, but it's based on how I found the power level of it, which I think is still important, even when you're using power level constraints. And even if it's lower power or high power, like raw card power still does matter, but it isn't the be all end all. And I think that's important. And I think that's something like more content is addressing. That's what I've been trying to do as well. Because that was always the thing for me too. It's just like if I was to read a review and it was just talking about like a hostile investigator, it's just again looking at cards in my cube. And it was just like if I was to point out like saying, okay, so it's a I thought it was a human. It's it's an ogre rogue. It looks like a person. This art has led me astray. But it's like, talking about like discarding. I'm gonna pretend it's a human actually. Whatever. We're sharpening it as a human. But let's say if it was a human detective, and this is, whenever it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card, and then whenever one or more players discards a card, investigate. Like one of the challenges is like, how much of that would I want to put in an article and how useful is that? So think, oh, it's a human. So if you have a human's package that could be better, or like if you have a discard package. And for me personally, I never really found a lot of that super useful. So it's just like, for me, I was just like, how useful can I make this as a reading exercise to talk about what the card does, what's the context of it without giving too much information and just like a bunch of stuff that people don't care about. Because I tend to go on in my articles, I tend to go pretty deep in terms of evaluation. I mean, I love to go on tangents as well, but like it's a point where it's just like, how much is too much? If I was to say like, okay, this is a 4/3, so it can attack really well, or it can't do, and it's like investigate, so you can do it with like artifact synergies. And it's just like, for me, I always try to keep it pretty generalist, and that's where I've tried to have evaluations when I talk about cards, for me at least. It is a challenge though, I would say. And I think like you'll find that even with like the surveys, like the lucky paper surveys, stuff like that, like because people are still using that 1 to 10 scale, but it covers a lot. Like it can cover power and cover how much they like the card. It covers like, it's a lot of stuff that's essentially set in one number. And it can be pretty hard to determine exactly what those individual weights are for people. Like it's essentially card value is some part of somebody's equation. Like everybody's individual equation, I would say, is probably different. Somebody's equation might be more weighted by like, aesthetics, vibes, is it an artifact? Is it an efficient card? Like, does it do X, Y, Z? Does it do all these things? And like everybody's equation is going to be different. I'd say like if I was to use like a generic vintage cube as an example and say like someone's mainly interested in evaluating things from a power axis, it's most likely still going to be very weighted towards power, but there might still be other things. I think it probably would have been, like I said, very easy for me to just give like way too much rather than too little. And I think that's part of, I think, the balance for me.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you were saying about the 1 to 10 scale about power. And I could say that this card is a 3 mana 5/5, so it's going to be very strong for some cubes. So this is why you should consider it for your cube, because just on raw stats, it's very strong. And I think there's such a wide variety of cubes that exist now. For example, looking at lower power cubes that are trying to recreate a limited format, or something like the regular cube that's much more like Masters power level, or all the way up to Legacy, then Vintage Cube. Many different cubes might purposefully be including cards that are lower power or have worse stats. And to me, that's why it's such an interesting concept of what cards should be highlighted and what makes them interesting. Like some of my favorite content that I see online about card evaluation or card discussion is, for example, the Commander Clash podcast, which is mostly a Commander podcast. They do a really fun segment called Shark Tank. And on that Shark Tank segment, everyone goes in a circle and talks about, this is a sleeper card that I think more people should be playing. It's super interesting. It could build a whole Commander deck around it, or get people's wheels turning in their head. Like, for example, I listened to it and they mentioned the card Glasses of Urza, which is just this super jank one mana artifact that lets you tap it to look at target player's hand. And they were just inspiring me by the way they were talking about you should play this more because it can do this for the politics and it can be powerful in these situations. And it just inspired me to build a whole cube around it. Thought, oh, what if I could build a cube that was all about these more janky one mana artifacts? Then another example was with All Will Be One. When that set came out, there was the card All Will Be One, which said whenever you put a counter on a permanent, you deal that much damage to something. And that card just really inspired me to say, wow, this is a red card that really wants you to put counters on all your stuff. And then when you put counters, you deal damage. And there's so many interesting combos and synergies with this card that it also maybe build a whole cube around it. And it got me really excited. And my question is with there being so many different types of cubes that can be built, and that's a big reason I built this podcast in the first place, to inspire people and to get people excited and to make somebody say, wow, this new card from Tarkir Dragonstorm makes me want to build a whole new cube. It gets me excited to update or make changes to my cube list.
Yeah, like a Dragonfire Blade or something. Like it probably takes on a very different context in a cube with a lot of like small artifacts. It's just like it's a one mana card, but it also isn't particularly efficient at equipping onto artifact creatures, but like the rate could be. And it's also like a lot of questions too, I think. And it almost sounds like a cop-out answer for me to say like you know best when looking at cards for your cube. And that's like as a content producer or someone who like, chimes in on evaluation types of things, sometimes that is like the thing. It's just like, sometimes it is difficult to evaluate for what one's goals are. Also, the same thing is just like when it comes to like making cube changes. I have an article that I've been mulling over. It's been in various states of dormancy since 2016 about like making cube changes. For the most part, it was just sitting on a hard drive, making small incremental changes to that article about just like how people approach cube changes and cube design. And some of that is, yeah, it's not just power. Sometimes it's just other stuff. Like I'm thinking of for Ether Drift, I think the Lucky Paper set review, the most popular card was Grim Bauble. So Grim Bauble was like the highest rated card, like with 40% testers. And like I have the gift of hindsight now, of course, as opposed to when the card came out. And I don't know if I rated it super highly. We usually have rated stuff on a scale 1 to 5 for power and vibes. But I want to say it was not super high. Like I want to say I probably rated it like a 3. And then for vibes, I probably said something like a 4. I put it as a 4. I'm actually kind of surprised. I probably should have put it lower. But yeah, I put it as a 4 for power, 4 for fun factor. It gets higher if you can bounce it or something. But like where it's rated highly is interesting because it has a lot of things that you can latch onto. Like it's an artifact, it's cheap. When it enters, it does something. You can sacrifice it to do something. It has all these things going for it. But part of my lizard brain looking at card power, it's like, but it's a sorcery. It's not particularly efficient being a sorcery. And it's just like all these little things. It's just like, I think in knowing now of the power level of the card, like I said, I probably would have rated it a power of like a 3. I think also with a lot of cube content, like with review kind of things, I think a lot of the times, whether intentional or not, a lot of the times it's done based on someone's own lens of the world. If somebody has like a main cube, they're evaluating stuff based on the context of that particular cube. And like a lot of the times when it's outside of that, it's usually educated guesses. And sometimes those are right, sometimes they're very wrong. It's just like if someone was to say, like, oh, this card is random uncommon. And it's like, oh, this card could be good in a peasant cube. I've had a peasant cube since 2019. I haven't updated it in forever. I think
Same.
I was going to say, I put it on the back burner from COVID and then I just hadn't updated it. But it was like, yeah, so I put that on the back burner. But I was just like, I can estimated guess for it. Same thing at Pauper Cube. Like, I'm on the Pauper Cube committee. So like I know enough to be dangerous. But that's not my main cube and I haven't drafted it that much. But I know enough. If I was to say like this card could be good in an artifact cube, like, Grim Bauble was, it would be a very educated guess. And I don't know how useful it is for me to make those kinds of educated guesses, even though I've had a lot of experience with cube design. I just don't know how useful that is for me, at least, to say, I think this could work. Because I mean, it could, but it's just a guess. Like I'm just kind of guessing based on what I think could work. Yeah, it's very hard. establishing a baseline of what the power of the format is and knowing what your tastes are for that definitely helps. Like if someone asks like, "Hey, I know you're really into metal. Recommend a metal band for me." I'm just like, I need context because I don't know what your tastes are. Like if it was just like someone who had no experience, maybe I could recommend like, Master Puppets or like Metropolis Part 2 by Dream Theater, something like that. If I know more, then I could probably make more educated guesses based on what I know of the context.
And it's funny that you mentioned Grim Bobble. I would
Hmm.
say that that card is not very powerful. In a vacuum, Disfigure is probably a better card
Yeah.
because it's sorcery speed compared to instant speed. But when I saw Grim Bobble, I got so excited. It
Hmm.
just felt like it was perfect for multiple of my cubes. Just the vibes. Like the trinket cube that I have that's filled with 0 and 1 mana cheap artifacts. This is a cheap artifact.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
So
why that's what I
it
was
fit
thinking. Like it would
perfectly.
go right in there. Yeah.
It fit perfectly in there. It was an artifact that I could sacrifice. It was an artifact that would fill the grave for delirium. It was an artifact that would be blinkable. And also for my Rakdos cube, which is a much more higher power cube, I have an artifact theme in there.
Hmm.
And I think something about it is in the past, Cube was much more focused on what is the power level of this card? Will it be able to contend at a high level power? For example,
Yeah.
in Vintage Cube, is this going to be better than Fatal Push and Disfigure? No. But I think that the way that a lot of cube design is going is synergy driven. When I talk to a lot of my cube friends who are designing their cubes, so often when they see a new card, they say, "Oh, this is going to fit perfectly into my cube because it can be blinked, it can go into the graveyard, it can have so much cross-pollination between archetypes." And I find cards like that fit into many different strategies to often be the most exciting cards, even if they might not be the most powerful.
Yeah, and I think that gets to part of the part of the question is just like how do you evaluate cards? Like I think power is still important. Like it still drives, I think, even if it isn't necessarily a power-based environment, there are still, I would say, for lack of better terms, there are probably a band of power levels in a cube. Just like if I was to use like the commander scale, even though that I don't really like, I don't really know much about commander. I just kind of follow the discourse and like I just remember the power scale that just got recently done from like 0 to 5 or whatever. Even if a cube isn't looking to like be mainly power focused, I think it's still important to have, and I think it's still even in those conversations, like like Grim Bauble, you can blink it, you can sacrifice it, you can do all this cool stuff. The underlying power of the format still drives what's possible, and realistically, also the people drafting it too. If someone doesn't really care about going 2-1 with like a deck that's like not the most powerful, like that's also the thing that can drive what the meta game looks like. Because I think that's also it. It's essentially just like what the meta game looks like in terms of that. Like I kind of know how Commander multiplayer politicking works, like in terms of just like in 1v1, I can't make a political deal with somebody. I can't be like, hey, attack that person over there because it's 1-on-1. So yeah, we got to attack each other. Yeah, I think that's part of it, right? Because I think that's also it in terms of just like the intended audience. I think that's a big part of it too. It's something we talked about. We did a episode on Pack One Slick Ones about just like designing for spikes or just like having them in mind. And one of the points I brought up is just like if there's somebody who's planning to spike the draft, how much is that going to ruin the experience of other people if they don't care about synergy, if they don't care about anything else really aside from just winning? Like how conducive is your environment to that kind of thing? Whether that's like making sure that deck isn't oppressive, even if they aren't winning necessarily, if they're still enjoying themselves. And that's difficult to answer because it's very based on like humans, and humans aren't 100% logical, nor should they be, but like sometimes it's just like vibes and just what they enjoy. But I think that's part of it, where a lot of it is what you can do with a card, but also being tempered in terms of what you can do. Also, kind of, I think part of this too is just like I'm just looking through the document, like the additive distraction. I think it's a term that was defined in a Mark Rosewater article, where essentially you see a line of text. He talks about like, oh, 2 mana 3/3, just vanilla, versus like a 2 mana 3/4 with text that says like if you control 10 or more artifacts, it has trample. And then people thinking of the card as weaker because you can't get the 10 artifacts. I think that can also kind of potentially hamper evaluation as well. Because I think that's something I've seen over the years so much is just like looking at something and like thinking like, oh, it isn't XYZ, so it's bad or something. It can be a common pitfall I've seen over the years.
I agree with what you're saying that with additive distractants, let's say that a card has choose a background on it or something,
Hmm.
or it's from even a Universes Beyond, which I know a lot of cube designers refuse to put cards from Universes Beyond. A card might be perfect for your cube and be really exciting. And the cube owner might say, this is perfect for the cube as it fills this purpose, but it still comes down to what the drafters are going to think when they see a pack.
Hmm.
And I know this is true with a lot of my play group is they don't like to read lengthy cards.
Hmm. Yeah.
People will just see a lengthy card and put it to the back of the pack.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think that there still is a benefit to looking at what are the generically most interesting cards in a new set. What are the most powerful cards in a new set? What cards are seeing play in modern or standard or pioneer? Because those are cards that are also going to be recognizable to your
Hmm.
drafters. So, sure, you can have some weird, uncommon from Perk Your Dragonstorm that, unless you drafted the set 50 times and it wasn't even good and limited, but it could be perfect for your strange thematic cube. If the drafters say, what is this card? I've never seen this before. I'm not going to play this. What is this?
Hmm.
I'm not. This is 10 lines of text from a commander precon card. You can only do so much to get your drafters to play the cards.
Yeah. It's one of those things I've heard over the years where it's just like just beat them with it or just like win with it and then they'll learn. But it's like it just feels kind of naive because it also just assumes like they'll realize that hey, this is an objectively powerful card when humans don't do that kind of thing. Also, like if they don't enjoy the card, they're not going to care if it's still just like I don't enjoy this card. I don't enjoy Shark Typhoon or something. Or whenever I would hear that, it's just like I know that's not necessarily the truth. At least it's not 100% truth, I would say.
Yeah, everyone has their own conceptions, and some drafters just will refuse to play the cards no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that player feedback is so important. While you might be looking at spoilers and the initial set, and you might take out 10 cards and say, these are perfect for my +1/+1 archetype or my link archetype. In the end, you got to still put them in your cube and test them out. And like I like what you said about seeding the cards in, getting a lot of feedback when you first draft it. And if players don't like the vibe of the card too, even if the cube drafter liked the vibe of the cards, if the players who you're going to be playing with don't like it, then that's also a big point.
Yeah. One thing that made me think of that I totally should have brought up before is just like one of the things that I think is very useful for a cube designer to do is to take pictures of your decks and use those kind of like as a snapshot of your metagame. I did an article for Lucky Paper about Heirloom Blade, which is a card that helped make me a better cube designer because it encapsulated a lot of things in terms of cube design. But I think one of them was I looked at the card and was like, I have a good feeling about this. Like, I think the rate's good. Like, I think it should be okay in terms of just like what its ability is. And a lot of the discourse about the card was there wasn't a whole lot at the time when it got previewed, but a lot of it were just like it's a bad grafted war gear, and grafted war gear is good because it equips for 0, and you have to spend 1 for this because it's and therefore it's bad. And it's just like A, that's pretty reductive. Like that's not really good card evaluation, even if you're trying to look at it from purely like a power level. I'll be blunt, that's just bad card evaluation skills. But also, what that taught me was like I was usually taking pictures of my decks as kind of like a what's working in my cube. And it was just like when I would look at pictures of, aggressive decks, a lot of them tended to have like creature types that like matched-ish. Like it wasn't like 10 goblins or something, but you get like 4 humans, 4 wizards, 4 warriors, just like class types where they would kind of mesh together enough well to work. And like I looked at a lot of the decks and was just like, yep, be good here, maybe good here. Yep, good be here. And I was just like going through the line. I'm like, yeah, this would totally work. And then I tried it out in a draft, and it totally was a good card there. Also, and I think this is more of just like a pure power level thing, is yeah, just if you're learning lessons from where you dropped the ball on old evaluations. Because I think if you're not actively learning from your mistakes, like It was a quote from one of the articles I wrote years ago where it's just about, I think it may have been about Kaizen. Kaizen is the concept of continuous improvement from like Japanese manufacturing. But I think I said something along the lines of like, if you're looking at like cards and your opinion is changing, but you're not learning, all you're really doing is keeping up. Like if I was to just say, look at stock up, and I was just like, okay, this card's just like mid divination variant, whatever, which I'm pretty sure is what I said about the card. And then realizing like later on, if I was like, oh, this card turns out it's good and I should have bought it, but I didn't. But I didn't learn anything. I was just keeping up with the game. I'm not like improving my skills at evaluation. I'm not realizing that that's a hole in my evaluation. That's doing a big disservice in terms of what you're doing for like your environment. One of the things I also used to do, which I would not advise people to do, is like I would make like pre-cons of decks when I want to try something out and then like have to jam them against myself. Just like, here's a table, here's my opponent. It was so bad. But like again, I didn't really have anything else. I didn't have a group. So I was just like, whatever. Here's me hunched over a table trying to play test red green aggro versus blue black control. And it was just so janky. But sometimes you got to do that kind of stuff too. For stuff like non-power level thing, which unfortunately, I think for me, again, maybe that's just the lens I tend to look at through things a lot as my primary lens of just like power level and looking at cards through that. Because I think at the end of the day, it's not what's going to matter most to everybody, but it's going to be part of the equation for everybody. It's just how much of that does that really matter, right? Even if it's just like this card seems way too, if Bombardiers is outside the power level of my, like, I tried it out, it was good, but had a drafter who was just, it's kind of like on my watch list anyway, in terms of just like seeing the card in other cubes. I was just like giving it like the side eye. You're like, I don't know, you're on the probation list, just like, I don't, yeah. And then I think somebody after a draft was like, I don't like this card. You should take it out. And I think I was probably just like 9/10 of the way there already. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, I'll take out gut too, because I think that was on the cusp of like power level. I think that was probably like a little too egregious. I was just like, yeah, I'll just cut those both. That's fine. Also, I think that's a big thing too, is just, yeah, being able to cut your darlings. And also, I feel like I got this phrase from somewhere else, but I don't think I actually did. But I think it's one of those phrases that I think touches on some of the stuff that you brought up in terms of just like drafters and if they don't enjoy cards or like they have reasons for not liking cards. Is like the cube and like the metagame is bigger than you. And I think that's probably partly from being part of like the designer groups for like not just me and like my little group, but like multiple people. Like I don't know how many people draft the vintage cube, and I'm not like the only person, of course, but I'm in a group. And like the Pauper Cube community, there's a lot of people who created copies of it or made or drafted. And yeah, it's not just me, right? Like I may have strong feelings about a card. I'm like, this card sucks. Or just like this card, we should totally have these cards. But it's not just me, right? The metagame's bigger than me. It's not just me. And I think that was probably one of the big level up moments for me in terms of evaluation too. It's like I said, kind of hard to do in a review, so to speak. Like if I do a set review, I did one for Dragonstorm Tarkir. I think that's the name.
I
Dragons.
always
I
forget
call
the
it
name of this
Tarkir
set.
2.0. I've been calling it that. Call it Tarkir 2. But like I did a review of that, or me and Trainmaster GT, and I'm very happy with like I think I got most of the hits. Like I didn't have anything as a 5 power level, but for 4.5 I had Elspeth, the new Elspeth, Corey Seal Cutter, Voice of Victory, and Rakshasa's Bargain. And I think most of the other cards that I touched upon were pretty accurate in terms of like how they've been power level wise. I haven't been able to cube much with them just because of like real life stuff, but just kind of outsourcing that to other places, I've just been like looking at other cubes and seeing like I think these cards work within that context, and I've been pretty happy with that. But like, yeah, vibes it's kind of harder. Elspeth is a 5, of course, because it's a Planeswalker, and I think that's got good vibes for lots of people. So like that kind of stuff is kind of harder to nail down, and I think that's probably going to be part of the challenge.
Yeah, I totally agree. At the end of the day, if you're drafting for a prize or players want to go 3-0, they will evaluate cards based on power level.
Hmm.
Players will try and take the most powerful card in the pack. And you could have a cube that every creature has changeling, or you can have a cube that everything is at ladies looking left, or some weird jank cube, and you could find a new card from the newest set and say, this is perfect. This woman is looking to the left in this art.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, if the card is weaker than all the rest of the cards, nobody's going to take it in the pack. So
Yep. Yeah,
I totally
exactly.
agree with what you're saying that at the end of the day, it's more than just you. It might fit your goals perfectly, but Voice of Victory from Turkey or Dragonstorm is just an insanely powerful card and will kill your opponent turn three, as I've
Hmm.
noticed at Boston Cube Party.
Yep,
So
it's gonna punch some people over and over. I have a friend who he was at one of the cube cons, Tim, who has a changeling cube. It's a nice format. Like I feel like the non-power stuff I think is definitely something that this conversation will probably get more gears turning in terms of just like how do you define that? Because it's very hard to define it for everybody. And it's one of those things where it's like if I define it for everybody, it just becomes nothing. But I do think that's probably where a lot more evaluation is like in the Pauper Cube group, they talked about before we'd been using kind of a bog standard rating scale, just like 1 to 10 or whatever. I think it's a 5 point, like, just like a strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, just like that, or just like strong dislike, dislike, neutral, strongly like this, and I like this and strongly like it. And that's something we've been using for years. And I think there's been conversations about tuning that. Do we want to use something like the vibe scale, or how do we want to capture other stuff? Because it's kind of like the whole milky coffee thing or the chunky spaghetti sauce. It's just like there's clearly other reasons people cube cards that aren't just because of power. And I don't think it's been captured in a lot of content because a lot of content hasn't needed to. A lot of it's kind of followed just kind of like it's one of those things that when I wrote about it in that article about it was my thoughts about set reviews as a general and then just kind of a Duskmorn post-mortem about like big picture stuff. A lot of cube reviews have been kind of just like I guess a lot of general set reviews for just like Magic, just like here's new set, here's Ether Drift for standard. A lot of it just kind of does it at the beginning. It just, does gives your thoughts and like those are the big thoughts. And then content is able to course correct through subsequent content. Like, say I'm Johnny or Mr. Spike, your guy talking about standard or whatever. I do my takes on Tarkir Dragonstorm, and I miss that Corey Steel Cutter is a absurd card. Because of the talking about a changing format, they can be like, okay, this week, let's look at the Moto events or just look at what's on the ladder. And wow, Corey Steel Cutter is really good in standard and modern. And just like they're able to course correct. But cube content has kind of followed the first part, but not the rest. And for me, at least, like when I was doing it, I'm just like, these reviews take so long to write anyway. Like, I don't know if it's really worth it. And I don't know if I really will. Like, I don't think I'm going to do like a Ether Drift postmortem, at least not for a while. But it certainly has never really needed to do the non-power stuff because that really hasn't been a part of reviewing aside from commander stuff like you're talking about. Like, yeah, they would talk about just like, here's Glasses of Urza. Give me the Shark Tank pitch. Just like this card seems really cool. Like here's Heirloom Blade, or just like here's some other stuff. I'm trying to think of like obscure commander cards, but here's Sunweb, or I'm trying to think like Hall of Gemfire. I don't know. I'm trying to think of random stuff in terms of EDH, though I can't think of much. But just here's a random 6 mana Chandra. Here's why you should play this in Commander. Like it's really cool. But I think maybe that's where we need to catch up. And we, I mean, is in terms of content creation, not just you or I or maybe like the world. But it's a complicated question, which means I don't really have a great answer for it. But I know for me personally, in terms of being a content consumer, for me, just like when I was looking at like how do I evaluate stuff, generally it's kind of the same thing with like, music reviews and stuff like that, where it's just like if this person seems like they have a good head on their shoulders and I generally agree with their takes on stuff, I'll generally agree with what they're saying and like course correct, like if they have any strengths or weaknesses to just go from there. For me, at least, it's definitely difficult because, yeah, so much of it is just like all these different contexts, lots of different cubes. And I think cubes are thankfully going in so many different directions and just like, here's straight power. Here's what I think is really cool, which I think is where it's going now, which I think is a great thing.
absolutely. And Usman, it's been awesome having you on Cube Reviews. Anything you want to say before we wrap up here?
I would say personally, in terms, I think one of those things I think as a cube, not just like creator, but like as a drafter, is just like mental shortcutting does a lot. We mental shortcut a lot in our lives. And I think Magic as well, because there's just so much information. And it's very easy to mental shortcut things or just like think like this versus this. Thinking in terms of the negatives, like the Grafted Wargear versus Heirloom Blade thing and not just thinking of the negatives. It's like, okay, this costs one more to equip. It gives less toughness, and therefore it's bad. Without just thinking overall in terms of things, I think that is personally, I think, a useful thing to do, not just like in terms of individual cards, but just in terms of just like overall, like your goals, just being realistic and being willing to challenge yourself and just like, okay, this isn't working. How do I do this? How can I realistically look at things? And just yeah, being realistic and being honest with yourself, I think is a great part of being a cube designer and I think drafter. I think that's the big thing. Is just yeah, mental shortcutting, linear thinking, additive distractions. It's all just a lot of it's the same song, just different beat.
I definitely mental shortcut when I'm drafting. I see a blink spell in a lower power cube and I take it.
Yeah,
Or I'm playing a higher power cube and I see counterspell and I'm in. I don't the rest of the pack
yeah.
disappears.
Sometimes it's just being able to say no to people. It's a nice thing.
Yes. And everyone definitely go check out Usman's content, like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode. And thank you all for listening. Please like, subscribe, follow, share. And I forgot to mention earlier, but if you happen to be in the area of Connecticut, come to Games IRL in Avon, Connecticut, my local game store. We always draft there, always looking for new cubers, and hope you have a great day.
All right, thank you.